Morenike stared at the cup of tea on the table. It looked harmless, steaming hot, the aroma of chamomile wafting into the air. But she knew better. This tea could kill her husband. She added the final touch, a tasteless powder that disappeared as she stirred. A loud thud startled her, and she turned to see Adewale stumbling into the kitchen, drunk as usual. His tie was loose around his neck, and lipstick smudged his shirt collar. "Where's my food?" he barked, slumping into a chair. Morenike's hands trembled, but she quickly pushed the tea toward him. "Drink this first," she said softly. Her heart pounded. She had to act normal. If this worked, it would all be over. No more humiliation, no more pain. As Adewale reached for the cup, the kitchen door swung open. It was Sunday, their new houseboy, carrying a tray of snacks. "Madam, should I—" Morenike cut him off with a sharp look. Sunday froze, sensing something was wrong. Morenike hadn't always been this way. She used to be a kind and patient woman, devoted to her husband. When she married Adewale, a successful businessman in Lagos, she thought she had won the jackpot. He was handsome, rich, and charming. At first, he treated her like a queen. He showered her with gifts, took her to fancy restaurants, and made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. But all that changed after their first year of marriage. She caught him in bed with their housemaid, Adaobi. It was a scandal. Morenike fired Adaobi immediately, but Adewale didn't even bother to apologize. Instead, he laughed it off, saying, "I'm a man. What do you expect?" From that day, Morenike refused to hire young female staff. Only men and older women could work in their home. But Adewale's behavior didn't stop. He moved his affairs outside the house, sleeping with women in hotels and brothels. Every time his escapades became public, it was Morenike who bore the shame. People whispered about her at parties and church meetings. "That's Adewale's wife," they'd say, "the one who can't control her husband." It was too much. She had to do something. Morenike sat in her bedroom, hands trembling as she turned over her thoughts. The sound of Lagos traffic outside seemed distant as she thought of Adewale's endless betrayals. She had reached her limit. This wasn't how a marriage was supposed to be. Bimpe's words from their last conversation echoed in her mind. There are ways to teach someone a lesson, but you need to be careful. Bimpe had given her a package containing an herbal mixture, supposedly used to discipline troublesome spouses. It wasn't lethal, Bimpe assured her, just something to weaken him for a while and give him time to reflect. Morenike hesitated, but reasoned that she had to act. She added a small pinch of the mixture into Ade. Sunday, the houseboy, had always been sharp. He noticed things others didn't. For weeks, he had seen the tension between Madame and Olga. He'd also noticed Madame sneaking into the kitchen late at night. That evening, as Madame served Olga tea, Sunday pretended to dust nearby. He watched Olga drink it without a second thought, then noticed Madame's face, calm on the surface, but her eyes darted nervously toward the cup. Sunday grew uneasy. Later, while cleaning the kitchen, he found a small sachet in the trash. The label was unfamiliar, but something about it seemed suspicious. He decided to keep an eye on the situation, unsure of what he might discover. The next morning, Adewale complained of dizziness and fatigue. "Maybe I've been working too hard," he muttered. brushing it off. Morenike tried to hide her satisfaction as she offered him another cup of tea. "This will make you feel better," she said, her tone steady. By afternoon, Adewale's condition hadn't improved. He cancelled meetings and spent the day resting. Morenike acted concerned, but her mind raced. Was the herbal mixture working too quickly? She needed to be cautious. Meanwhile, Sunday became more suspicious. He noticed Olga's symptoms seemed to worsen every time Madame prepared his tea. He decided to investigate further, but he knew he had to tread carefully. That night, when the house was quiet, Sunday crept into the kitchen. He searched the trash again and found the sachet he had seen earlier. This time, he pocketed it and planned to visit someone who might recognize it. The next morning, Sunday told Madame he wasn't feeling well and asked for a day off. She agreed without much thought, her focus on Adewale's condition. Sunday went to a local herbalist, showing him the sachet. The herbalist examined it closely. "This isn't dangerous," he said, "but it can make someone very weak if used improperly. Where did you get this?" Sunday didn't answer, but he felt a mix of relief and dread. While it wasn't fatal, something about this situation still felt wrong. He decided to return to the house and keep watching. By the end of the week, Adewale's condition worsened. He complained of constant fatigue, dizziness, and headaches. Morenike acted as the dutiful wife, serving him meals and checking on him regularly. "Maybe you need to see a doctor," she suggested, her voice calm but insistent. Adewale, ever proud and dismissive, waved her off. "It's just stress. I'll be fine," he muttered. He had no idea that his so-called loving wife was behind his mysterious symptoms. Sunday, however, couldn't shake his unease. He noticed that Olga only seemed sick after consuming Madame's tea. He started to pretend to clean the living room during tea time, watching closely. His suspicions grew stronger with each passing day, but he needed evidence before making any move. Sunday decided he couldn't stay silent anymore. He wasn't sure of Madame's intentions, but he knew something wasn't right. The next time Morenike prepared tea for Adewale, Sunday offered to serve it. "Madame, let me take it to Olga," he said with a polite smile. Morenike hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "No need, I'll take it myself," she replied, clutching the tray. Sunday nodded, but his suspicions deepened. Later that night, while everyone slept, Sunday sneaked into the kitchen again. This time, he searched the cupboards for the source of the powder Madame had been using. Hidden behind a row of spice jars, he found a small bag labeled in a language he didn't understand. He took a pinch and carefully wrapped it in paper, deciding to visit the herbalist again for answers. The herbalist frowned as he examined the powder Sunday brought. "This isn't ordinary. It's a strong blend used for controlling someone's energy. It's not poison, but if someone uses it too much, it can cause long-term harm." Sunday's heart sank. He realized Madame wasn't just trying to discipline Olga. She was taking away his strength, little by little. He thanked the herbalist and hurried back to the house, unsure of what to do next. Should he confront Madame, tell Olga, or keep quiet and risk being blamed if things got worse? Sunday decided he needed a plan, but time was running out. Olga was getting weaker by the day, and Madame didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. Dale couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His brother looked worse than he had ever seen him, and Morenike's calm demeanor didn't sit right with him. Over dinner, He noticed that Adewale barely touched his food, wincing as he swallowed small bites. Have you seen a doctor? Dele asked, watching his brother closely. Adewale groaned. I don't need a doctor. Morenike's been taking care of me. Dele nodded, but didn't buy it. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Dele pulled Sunday aside. What's really going on here? He asked in a low voice. Sunday hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one could hear them. I don't know for sure, sir, but I think Madame might be adding something to Olga's tea. I found this. He handed Dele the sachet and the small pinch of powder he had taken to the herbalist. Dale's face darkened. Don't tell anyone we talked. I'll handle this. The next morning, Dele quietly observed as Morenike prepared Adewale's tea. He noticed her carefully measuring a pinch of something from a small container before stirring it in. His heart raced, but he remained calm. Good morning, Dale said, walking into the kitchen casually. Morenike froze for a split second before smiling. Good morning, Dele. How did you sleep? Very well, thank you. Let me take the tea to my brother, he offered, reaching for the cup. Morenike hesitated, but didn't protest. Of course, she said with a tight smile. Dale walked into the living room, but instead of handing the tea to Adewale, he placed it on the table. Don't drink this yet, he said firmly. Adewale, confused, frowned. Why not? Just trust me, Dele replied. He planned to take the tea to a lab later that day to find out what was really going on. Dele couldn't wait for the lab results. That evening, he confronted Morenike directly. What are you giving my brother? He asked, holding up the tea she had prepared. Morenike's face hardened. What are you talking about? I know you're adding something to his tea. I've seen you, and Sunday confirmed it. Morenike's calm facade cracked. You have no idea what I've been through, Dele. Your brother has humiliated me for years. Women, scandals, disgrace. I'm just trying to protect myself. Dale stared at her, anger and disbelief mixing on his face. By poisoning him. That's not protection, that's cruelty. Morenike glared back, her voice cold. It's not poison. It's a lesson. Maybe now he'll understand how it feels to be powerless. Dale didn't respond. He had to find a way to stop this before it went too far, but he also needed to protect his brother from his own recklessness. Dale took the tea and the powder to a lab the next morning. The technician confirmed what the herbalist had said. It wasn't a lethal poison, but prolonged use could cause severe health issues. Armed with this information, Dele returned home and confronted Adewale. Do you know what's been happening to you? He asked, laying the results on the table. Adewale, weak and confused, squinted at the papers. What's this? Morenike has been adding something to your tea. It's not poison, but it's why you're feeling this way. She said it's her way of teaching you a lesson. Adewale's eyes widened in shock. She did what? Dale nodded. You need to address this, but first, we're getting you to a doctor. Adewale confronted Morenike that evening, his voice shaking with rage. What have you been doing to me? He demanded, his frail figure trembling. Morenike stood her ground, arms crossed. What have I been doing? What about you, Adewale? Years of humiliation, women in my house, in hotels, in public. Do you know what it's like to be the laughing stock of Lagos? Adewale's anger faltered for a moment, replaced by confusion. So you decided to make me sick? You wanted to punish me? I wanted you to feel powerless, she spat, her voice cold. The way you've made me feel all these years. Dele, who had been standing silently in the corner, stepped between them. Enough, he said firmly. This isn't solving anything. Adewale, you've caused this mess with your behavior. Morenike, you've taken things too far. You both need to fix this, or it's going to destroy you. A tense silence filled the room, both husband and wife glaring at each other. For the first time in years, the cracks in their marriage were fully exposed. Dale took Adewale to see a doctor the next morning. After a thorough examination, the doctor confirmed that while the herbal mixture hadn't caused permanent damage yet, prolonged use could have led to serious complications. You're lucky, the doctor said, but you need to rest and stop taking whatever it is you've been consuming. Adewale nodded, though shame weighed heavily on him. For the first time, he realized how deeply his actions had hurt Morenike. He had treated his marriage like an afterthought, and now he was paying the price. Dale pulled Adewale aside as they left the clinic. You need to change, bro, he said bluntly. This is your wake-up call. If you don't fix things, Morenike might not stop next time. Adewale nodded again, but his mind was racing. Could he truly change? And more importantly, would Morenike forgive him? Back at the house, Morenike was waiting for them. Her arms were crossed, and her face was set in a mixture of anger and exhaustion. What now? She asked coldly. Adewale hesitated, then sat down slowly. I've been wrong, he said quietly. I've hurt you in ways I can't undo. But trying to harm me, that's not the answer. Morenike's eyes flashed. So now you want to play the victim? After everything you've done? Dele intervened before the argument could escalate. Both of you need to stop pointing fingers. You've been wrong, Adewale, and Morenike, your actions were dangerous. If you want to save this marriage, you need to rebuild trust. Morenike sighed, her anger deflating. I'll give you one chance, Adewale, she said. Change your ways or this marriage is over. I won't waste my life cleaning up after your mess anymore. Adewale nodded, his face grim. He knew this was his last chance. Adewale sat in his study that night staring at the blank page of a notepad. Dale's words and Morenike's ultimatum echoed in his mind. He had always prided himself on being untouchable, but now, for the first time, he felt vulnerable. He realized he had taken everything for granted: his wife, his family, and his health. The next morning, Adewale called for a family meeting. He stood before Morenike and Dele, his voice quieter than they had ever heard. I've been selfish, he admitted. I've let my pride and greed ruin our marriage. I'm ready to change. Morenike watched him carefully. Talk is cheap, Adewale, she said. I need to see it. Adewale nodded. I'll prove it. I'll start with therapy, alone and with you, if you'll join me. I'll stop drinking, and I'll make amends for the embarrassment I've caused you. Dale nodded approvingly. Morenike said nothing, but agreed to give him a chance. It was a fragile truce, but it was a start. Adewale kept his word, starting therapy the following week. At first, he was reluctant to open up, but his therapist challenged him to confront his destructive behavior. For the first time, Adewale admitted that his infidelity and drinking were ways to mask his insecurities and need for control. At home, Morenike was skeptical. She watched him closely, waiting for signs of relapse. To her surprise, Adewale began helping with small tasks around the house, things he had always dismissed as women's work. He also cut back on his nights out, choosing to spend time with her instead. Sunday, still wary, noticed the changes too. He hoped they were genuine but remained cautious. After all, Oga had a history of breaking promises. Despite Adewale's efforts, Morenike struggled to let her guard down. Years of betrayal had built walls around her heart, and she wasn't ready to trust him again. She focused on her own growth, starting a business she had dreamed of for years. I need something that's mine, she told Dele during one of their conversations. Something that doesn't depend on Adewale. Dele encouraged her, seeing it as a healthy step. You're right, he said. Your happiness shouldn't hinge on him, but if he's really changing, maybe there's hope for both of you. Morenike wasn't sure. Part of her wanted to believe in Adewale's transformation, but another part of her feared it was temporary. A few weeks later, Adewale faced his first real test. An old friend invited him to a lavish party, promising the best company money can buy. For a moment, the temptation was strong. He could easily fall back into his old habits. But something stopped him. He thought of Morenike, her tired eyes filled with disappointment, and Dele's warning. Instead of attending the party, he went home and surprised Morenike with a quiet dinner. She was wary at first. What's this about? She asked. I just wanted to spend time with you, Adewale said. I know I don't deserve your trust yet, but I'm trying. For the first time in years, Morenike smiled at him, a small smile, but genuine. It was a step toward healing. Though Adewale was making visible efforts to change, Morenike's doubts lingered. She couldn't forget the nights spent alone, the whispers at parties, and the public humiliations. Even as he came home earlier and treated her with more respect, she questioned whether this change would last. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Adewale handed her his phone. Here, he said, no passwords, no secrets. I want you to know there's nothing to hide. Morenike hesitated. This was new. Adewale had always guarded his phone like a vault. Slowly, she took it and scrolled through his messages and call logs. For the first time, she found nothing suspicious. Still, she was cautious. You think this will fix everything? She asked. No, Adewale admitted, but it's a start. Sunday, ever observant, decided to speak privately with Madame Morenike. Madam, he said cautiously, Oga seems to be trying, but you need to be careful. What do you mean? She asked, her tone sharp. I've seen men like Oga before, Sunday replied. Sometimes they change, but sometimes it's just for show. Don't let your guard down completely. Morenike appreciated Sunday's loyalty, but dismissed his concerns. I know my husband better than you do, she said firmly. If he goes back to his old ways, I'll know. Sunday nodded, though he remained skeptical. He vowed to keep watching, just in case. One night, while out for a business meeting, Adewale ran into an old flame, Tope, at the venue. She was flirtatious, laughing at his jokes and touching his arm lightly. For a brief moment, the old Adewale resurfaced. He considered spending more time with her after the meeting, but as he looked at Tope, he thought of Morenike. her pain, her patience, and her ultimatum. He excused himself politely and left the venue early, returning home instead. When he walked through the door, Morenike looked up, surprised. "You're back early," she said. "I missed you," he replied simply. It wasn't entirely true, but in that moment, he realized how much he valued her. For the first time, resisting temptation felt like a victory. As news of Adewale's improved behavior began to spread, the community buzzed with curiosity. Neighbors who had once whispered about Morenike's misfortune now began to praise her resilience. "You're a strong woman," one church member told her. "Most women would have left by now." Morenike smiled politely, but kept her thoughts to herself. She didn't feel strong, just tired. While she appreciated the change in public perception, she knew her happiness depended on more than Adewale's behavior. For Adewale, the newfound respect was bittersweet. He realized how deeply he had tarnished his reputation and how long it would take to rebuild trust, not just with Morenike, but with everyone. Morenike's business, a small boutique selling handmade accessories, began to flourish. She threw herself into the work, finding joy in creating something meaningful. Adewale supported her venture, surprising her by connecting her with influential clients. "I owe you this much," he said. For the first time in years, they worked together as a team. It was a small step toward rebuilding their marriage, but it gave Morenike hope that they might find a new kind of partnership. Dele remained a steady presence, mediating arguments and encouraging them to keep moving forward. "You're not just fixing a marriage," he told Adewale. "You're fixing yourself. If you don't stay committed, you'll lose everything." Adewale took his brother's advice to heart. He even joined Morenike in therapy, addressing the root causes of his behavior. Slowly, they began to understand each other in ways they hadn't before. One day, while shopping for her boutique, Morenike ran into one of Adewale's former flings. The woman smirked and said, "You really think he's changed? Men like Adewale don't change." Morenike walked away without responding, but the encounter rattled her. That night, she confronted Adewale. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Have you been faithful?" Adewale looked her in the eye and said, "Yes, I'm not that man anymore." For the first time, Morenike believed him. It was a fragile trust, but it was a start. Months later, Morenike hosted a small celebration for the success of her boutique. Friends and family gathered in their home, praising her hard work and resilience. Adewale, now healthier and more grounded, stood by her side, proud of her achievements. Dale pulled Morenike aside during the party. "You've done well," he said, "but remember, the real work is never over." Morenike nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. Change was a journey, not a destination. As the party wound down, Adewale and Morenike sat together on the balcony, watching the Lagos skyline. "Thank you for giving me another chance," Adewale said, his voice filled with sincerity. Morenike smiled faintly. "Thank you for finally seeing me." Their marriage wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But for the first time in years, they felt like partners, two people working toward a future built on respect and understanding. The road ahead would be long, but for now, they were willing to walk it together.